Hello, my friends. It's great to see you again.
Hello.
Hello.
Today, we get to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, questions. As a coach and a former teacher, I think questions are incredibly powerful. So, what we've landed on today is our top three most powerful questions that any parent can ask right away that will help make their life easier and hopefully help make the experience that they have raising their kid and the connection that they have with their kid better. So that's what we're here to talk about. Should we dive in?
Yeah,
Yep.
let's jump in.
All right. So I'll introduce a question and then let's talk about it because I want to hear your perspectives on it. So the question, this question that I'm going to share comes from the world of coaching. And it's a question I ask with individuals and teams all the time. And it's, what does success look like? And it's context specific. So, okay, what does success look like in this decision that we need to make, in this thing that we're working on, in this dilemma that we're trying to untangle? But often what I found as a coach is people bring in different versions of what success looks like. And unless we put it on the table and really talk about it, we may not be aligned in our version of success. And so unintentionally, unwittingly, we may be rowing in two different directions when we could be rowing in the same direction as long as we understand what success means. So that's my question. What does success look like? We could ask it in this conversation. We might say, well, success looks like we talk about these three questions and hopefully provide some tips and tools for parents listening. Emily, what comes
Yeah.
up for you when you hear that question?
Yeah, it oddly kind of makes me think of the concept of like backwards design, which is like where you start. Maybe it's not that odd because I think it does make sense that you start with the goals and work backwards. I think it's also one of those things that once you learn about it, feels intuitive. For instance, like if you're designing like a lesson or even any kind of event, right? It's easy to kind of start with like, I'm going to have this component and like this component and like a general sense of like, this is what I want. But that doesn't mean that you're actually going to like get to the goal. And so I think, yeah, like starting with the outcome, even designing like a game, for instance, like you want the audience to take away this or like feel this really helps direct your focus. And yeah, like Haley was saying, I think it's very broadly applicable to classes, counseling sessions and so on. So I would recommend it.
Yeah, and I think you can take on like big, huge topics, but also kind of micro topics that you might take for granted, like, oh, we're just going to talk about this.
Yes.
Especially if you have a positive relationship with your kid, it's easy for your child to want to do something because they think you want them to do it. And also then, okay, we decided to do a debate team. 6 months, do we still want to do it? 1 year, do we still want to do it? And being okay with the goals changing and what success
Mm-hmm.
looks like changing.
Hey, I like your point about the college admissions. I feel like that's a really good kind of like venue that it becomes more important than you would think. So like yeah, maybe the kid wants to go to like different colleges and the parents have a different opinion, but I think like really digging into that, like where are those desires stemming from? Defining success helps you clear that up, right? So if the kid is saying, I want to have smaller class sizes because I want to make closer friends and like I want to have like this kind of curriculum because I want to explore, versus maybe a parent cares a lot about staying in state because of the loans. And it's not like there's like a right or wrong answer, but I think getting it all out on the table is going to improve the communication. Because maybe in some cases, like that hasn't been communicated clearly to the other party. Yeah.
I like that a lot too. And we think about college at a younger and younger age, but again, starting those conversations when your kid is younger so that you're already comfortable on both ends having that conversation when they are these much bigger decisions. So, do you want to do swim classes? Okay. Are we doing swim team? Are we doing once a week? Is it just in the summer? And kind of leaving some of that up to like listening to what your child is interested in and wants versus making all the decisions. Kind of leads into some of the other conversations we've had around building up your
Well,
child.
let me jump in. I want to ask you both a question because I can imagine a parent listening, maybe saying, "I like the idea in theory, but if I just outsource all these, what do we do next? Questions to my kid, then maybe I lose some ability as a parent to help guide them through life, or maybe they make a choice that I'm just fundamentally I don't. It's really hard for me to get on board with that, even if maybe they define that as success."
Yeah.
Maybe I want them to play a sport. They want to play debate. And it's really hard for me to sit with. what would you say to those folks listening that are maybe thinking in that direction?
I think kind of similar, just in the sense of like I see it as a mechanism for understanding somebody better, not necessarily for kind of saying like, oh, like I'm kind of giving up like authority. I think, teachers, parents, and anyone who's kind of in those positions, you're in that position also because like you have the capacity to like mentor and guide, but that doesn't preclude you from at least kind of understanding where the other person is coming from. So sometimes that might mean you get to make a decision that you're both happier with, and other times it might mean that you I want to guide the person towards a certain decision, but at least you're understanding their perspective and like the thoughts more. So I still think it's kind of a productive like strategy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then also recognizing as parents, we do have more experience of like,
Yeah.
yes, we're going to do swim lessons because I know 100% that is safe for you to learn how to swim.
Yeah.
Like that's
Exactly.
non-negotiable. Once you know how to swim, we can talk about what that looks like going forward, right? Even like I know debate team 100% is going to make you more confident. Like just try it. Don't say no before you even try it. So not taking the power from the parent putting it in the kid, but just making sure it's a back and forth and
Mhm.
respecting like what is making your kid uncomfortable and what you want to push on. But that's definitely an individual. And even when you have multiple kids, it's different from one kid to
Mhm.
the other, right?
Yeah.
One of the practices we do here in our home, my daughter's 5, got from Dr. Becky, the author of Good Inside, where I'll say to my daughter, for the next 20, 30 minutes, like, you're in charge. You get to decide what we do. It's time bound. It's usually context bound too. So I'm not saying we're not going out for ice cream. We can play here in this room, or we can play in your room, but you get to decide what we play with. And she loves that because I think it gives her a sense of self-efficacy and agency, and she's really motivated. And I'll just close this point with this. I didn't recognize until I encountered this idea, but oftentimes communication, parent to child, is I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And so flipping that for a second and saying, you get to decide what success looks like, is really powerful. And it also opens up space down the line for if there's something I need, okay, now we got to go do X, Y, and Z. My daughter's usually much more bought into that idea and willing to do it when she's had a chance to say, here's what I'd like to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that like the two-way street of respect of like I hear you too, like I do what you want to do because you want to do it sometimes. And I'd love to hear more too, Kevin, because in past conversations you've talked about like scales, 10-point scales, maybe 5-point scales for kids, and how that conversation looks to answer this question: what does success look like? And I love the idea of like making smaller goals that are more achievable,
A little bit better.
less daunting.
Thank you too for indulging me on my question. Haley, what do you got?
Yeah, I was thinking about as parents, especially with last time we talked about going back to school, maybe for the first time, or even if it's just like you got used to your summer routine, now you're back in school, and the idea of control, which is a strong word, but as a parent, like what can I control? What do I want to control? What do I need to let go of? And then it led to this word of like influence, which is different than control.
Hmm.
And so thinking about building a relationship with your kid's teacher, maybe building a relationship with other parents that your kid is hanging out with at school. Or specifically, I was thinking about maybe parents who have had their kid at home up until elementary school and they were kind of in charge of the day to day, and then you're kind of releasing that control. Yeah, I was thinking about as a teacher, it was really hard sometimes to just like let kids go do something and not kind of be facilitating all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I think that would be more of one like a personal question in your mind versus having a dialogue about that with a 5 or an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's also between parents if you are in a partnership raising a child together. Yeah, what can I control? What do I need to control?
Hmm.
But more importantly, like what can I influence and how?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great question. What do I need to control? And then how can I influence more?
Yeah, like safety came up, like that's important, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a thought, but Emily, I'm curious. What comes up to you? What comes up for you when you hear control, influence?
Yeah. My mind kind of goes to like helicopter parents. Honestly, I feel like that's the link I make, and it's there are also those terms like it's like authoritarian, right? Like authoritative. I forget what the kind of last one is. So I was kind of thinking about parenting styles, and I think like Haley said, it's hard. It's really independent to each situation. You know, it depends also on um, like maybe the personality that your kid has, or like the kind of like the pre-existing ways that you've like worked through things before. Um, but I think helping. How should I say this? Like it's really important to have that balance because even if there are like many things that like safety and like like classes and like extracurriculars that like you might know the best about, I think that kind of like even if you're able to control all of that really takes like an opportunity away from your child.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think our questions, Emily, kind of overlap. So I don't know if you want to introduce your doing because
Yeah, I could. But if anyone has anything else they want to say about control, it's just yeah, I think it's related. Well, I can go into my question if people are ready. Yeah, my
Ready?
question is generally, yeah, about self-efficacy and like, how can you help your child develop self-efficacy or like guide them to kind of start doing that on their own? And I also want to emphasize, I think this is really like a lifelong process, but first to kind of like define self-efficacy, I think of it as having trust or confidence in like your abilities to do things independently, to achieve things. And I don't think it means that you do everything perfectly and you have all the skills. I think it's more about that sense of like I am capable, and I know that I'm a person who can try to do this. I think this is also it's kind of related to like this external versus internal like locus of control. If people don't know what that is, like generally if you have an external locus of control, you tend to think that outside events are kind of causing things and you don't have a lot of control over that, and that can make you very kind of reactive to things. Having an internal locus of control, it's like I think seen as being like a healthier mindset because it means like yes, it doesn't mean that you have control over everything, but that like you are more confident in your capabilities to kind of adjust and be flexible. And I think being flexible is like so important in this year and in this kind of um, age. So I was thinking about self-efficacy, and I can talk about some things I noticed in my job, but I first want to ask you too if you have any other thoughts.
I love this explanation. I love this question
yeah.
around self-efficacy, and I love your explanation of it as it relates to control. I'm curious to hear your examples.
Yeah, well, I won't go too in depth, but just as to kind of rehash, I work as an academic advisor for undergrad students, and I'm thinking a lot about the incoming first years actually, because it's such a huge transition to college, and they're all over the map, right? Like some of them don't email you a single time. They're all doing great. Other ones are kind of in your inbox more, and like that's totally fine. But I think for students who come in with a lot of questions and anxieties, like I as like the teacher slash counselor slash like parent in another context and wondering like, how can I help set this kid up so that they are able to kind of blossom during college, like ask for help when they need to, but
Mm.
also feel like they have a good handle on their life going forward as they kind of, yeah, again, like develop into like a young new adult. And so, for instance, like, how do I register for classes or like what kind of choices should I make? These are really big questions for these incoming freshmen. And sometimes there are good answers, like you should take such and such classes, but other times like, oh, like what if these two things conflict, or like what if I have trouble managing my life? I think it's really key to model some of those things. Like modeling came up in our last conversation too. And like as an example, if a student comes in and they're having trouble figuring out the system, you definitely want to help them, like show them examples and like maybe in that appointment, like guide them through those processes. But does that mean that you should sign them up for every class in the future for the rest of college? Like probably not, right? So that's like a bit of an extreme example, but I think this is like the case of like balance where you want to help them while simultaneously trying to give them the tools to go and try things on their own, and to slowly encourage them to continue doing so.
Mm.
Yeah. It's like the do you give someone a fish or teach them how to fish?
Yeah.
And the younger we can do that, especially smaller things, where it's like, let's just practice
Yeah.
versus what
Well,
classes should I take in college? Like, that's a huge question. So,
that's a big one. That's a big one. And as a coach, what comes up for me, I think about it's a pretty technical term, but I think about the word contracting.
Hmm.
because I think every relationship has a contract, or some people like to talk about it as an operating system. Like, what are the terms and conditions here? And not very often do we make those things explicit. So I'm thinking, Emily, about you in academic advising. Part of the contract, it sounds like, is helping the kid develop self-efficacy over the course of your relationship.
Yes.
And so that's your version of success. If I'm the student, maybe I want you to just chime in if you feel like I'm making a mistake in terms of my course selection.
Right.
Maybe my biggest struggle, if I'm a different student, is homesickness.
Mm.
And so what I actually need from you is a little bit more in that, like, I need a more therapeutic conversation, or
Yeah.
you holding space for me to bring those emotions in. That's a different contract.
Yeah.
And so how are we contracting? How are we recontracting when that's appropriate? And is all this stuff as explicit as possible? Again, in my work, I think a lot more of it remains below the surface than we think.
Yeah. I like that example a lot about contracting.
I went to a professional development as a teacher about self-efficacy and building it in students, but also in your teaching staff. And one of the examples that they gave was, do you remember the TV show like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great metaphor of like, you get this question and sometimes it's just like, the answer is A, right? But if you know kind of your lifelines when you don't know the answer, it gives you multiple ways to approach that problem, like phone a friend, if you can figure out who might be able to help you and how to ask them. I forget what the other ones are. What is like, one of them's like they take away half the answers,
Mm.
So maybe you
Yeah.
can do some elimination, like I know I shouldn't do this or this, so now like how do I solve this problem? I forget what the other one was, but like the idea of like lifelines and knowing how to solve the problem versus just getting stuck, frustrated, giving up. I think that's what self-efficacy is in my mind, of like, I know when a problem comes up, I have options of how to solve it. And if I actually still really can't solve it, I still know that I have this person who I trust. And even if we both can't solve it, they're going to support me through that too.
Yeah, that's great. I love the definition of like developing problem solving like capabilities, right? That makes me think of AI as well, just because it's like, students, not just students, adults too, just we're so used to just asking it things now and it just gives you answers. And I think the first problem is that it could be hallucinating. So you always should check on that anyways. But I think the second more general issue is that like it's just it does take away the opportunity for you to go and problem solve. And even if you could Google things before, I think it involved like a little bit more sifting through. And now it just feels like the information literacy, the dangers of not having that are kind of like ever increasing. And so like for kids now who are younger still, who already have like devices, who are going to have access to these like AI tools, I think it's self-efficacy is going to come in a whole different way. And it's going to be really important in schools and at home to think about how to start fostering like what are your other resources, like how are you going to approach this tool, like how can you develop your skills alongside these tools. And maybe my last thought is like some schools are like taking away phones now, right? And maybe that's one solution, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot more, so I'm curious to see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And questions with right answers versus there's a lot of questions that we wonder that don't have one single right answer.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to get a one answer response? And yeah, that was a great topic too.
This has been a great conversation. Well, we like to close with takeaways. My takeaway, I just want to capture these three questions for folks listening. So question one, what does success look like? Question two, what can I control, or where do I need to control things, and where can I influence? And question number three, how can I help my child have a deeper sense of self-efficacy or independence? Did I get those right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are three great questions for people listening. And I'm going to kick it to you two. Takeaways. Over the course of the conversation, what came up? What came up for you both?
I think my takeaway is just that you need to figure out the balance, and like sometimes that takes like trial and error. But to have an open mind about like your definitions changing. I guess like I think back to like the contracting, recontracting, because I think that can be applicable like across these three questions, and like ideally you're able to get to like a really good balance. But every situation, every kid is going to be like a little bit different, but just like stay patient and like work through that and figure out how, yeah, the best way to like be in relation with the other person.
Yeah, I think the idea of practicing and modeling from a young age and just being okay as a parent that like it's gonna go wrong a lot of
Yeah.
times. Um, I think that's where a lot of my confidence has come in talking about these questions because teaching for over 10 years, I did it wrong hundreds of times,
Yeah.
and like learning from that too. So maybe starting with not smaller problems, but like starting with things that are achievable and that you can learn from before you're faced with a huge big problem where you can still apply these tools, but you have some practice in kind of what that looks like. Maybe that is a great way to start, like Kevin said, with like instead of going from what goes from a 4 to a 10, how do you go from a 4 to a 5? I think that's a good
Yeah.
example of that.